Hello, and welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast, brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, the host of the podcast and the president of our management consulting firm. Welcome to 2024 and our first episode for the year. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we began. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share what our clients and partners do daily to impact the world. We want to highlight this essential work and the work that they do for their customers, clients, and stakeholders that is changing lives despite the many challenges that they face. On today's episode, we'll be talking to you about what our theme is for 2024. The guests that I have with us today are Will Hornsby and Elizabeth Black, both from Public Knowledge, and they're here to talk with me today about generating and using evidence to drive impact and change. Welcome to both of you. So glad to have you here today. Let's start by getting to know you each just a bit more. And Will, if you don't mind starting, tell us a bit about yourself and your background, what you do for work right now, and how you got there.
Yeah, so I'm Will Hornsby, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Delivery with Public Knowledge. I'm a social worker. I started my career working for the state of Alabama in terms of child welfare, and I progressed. At the time, we were involved in a federal consent decree. The state child welfare agency was involved in reforming how they work with families, moving to be a very strengths-based approach with a core belief that families can change. I was young in my career experiencing this. It was really a fortuitous opportunity, and I was able to work at the county level, at the state level. Then I had the opportunity to go work for the Children's Bureau with the federal government doing the Child and Family Service Reviews. I was part of the team that rolled out from round one and was able to be involved with the first couple of rounds of CFSRs. And after having our daughter and deciding that we wanted to get closer to family, I made the move to being a consultant. And for the last a little over 13 years, I started work with Center for the Support of Families and merged and integrated with Public Knowledge. And my work has focused on trying to transform, improve, work with people to solve problems, and to basically make things better.
So let's get to know you just a bit more on a personal level, Will. Tell us who you are outside of work and what values you live by.
I'm a lucky dad, a lucky partner, a lucky person. I live in Alabama close to family. We made a decision to get close to move back home, get close to family. I love spending time with my wife, with my daughter, and just exploring where we live, watching movies, going to live music, reading interesting things, connecting with friends. That's kind of who I am, how I spend my time. There's college football thrown in there as well. And, my values it's interesting because over the last few years, I find myself, I've always been focused on outcomes, impact, but I'm really finding myself more so interested in generativity, succession, helping to help colleagues and others move forward in their careers and in their life. That's where I find myself thinking and spending time, and I actually love it.
I love that you talked about being in Alabama, because we're actually recording today in Alabama, close to your home. And I'm watching you look out at the water as we're talking, and wishing that I could see it too. But it's a absolutely beautiful, breathtaking place to be in the country.
Yeah.
Beautiful part of the country, the Eastern Shore here. I just wish I had something more to say about Nick Saban.
We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Because none of us have anything other than you.
We're going to be okay.
All right, Elizabeth, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your background, kind of what you do for work right now, and how did you get there?
Well, first off, I just want to say, sitting here looking over Mobile Bay with both of you, Will and Stacey, I feel an enormous sense of gratitude to be where I am and to get to do the work that I get to do. I don't take that for granted. In a way, I mean, like Will, I'm a social worker. I, started my career actually teaching special education in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, 3rd through 5th grade special ed. And that had a tremendous impact on me. That experience, living in New Orleans and meeting those families, getting to know those young people. And it really was my first connection and awareness of public child welfare system and a behavioral health system and the roles that those systems played in families' lives. It also was a deep immersion for me in understanding dynamics related to racial disproportionality and the impact of, which children in that school were getting referred out of regular education classes and that educational track towards, a special education track. So anyway, that's where I really started my career. In many ways, kind of like Will, I spent about the first decade of my career kind of in the nonprofit sector, but very focused at that time on getting a master's in social work, but also doing a lot of work at the time for and with kinship families. So I was working at the juvenile court in Nashville, and we were involved with multiple different partners focused on, how do we support and better meet the needs of children who are coming to the attention of the foster care system, but how do we keep them within their own families and at the time connected to grandparents, cousins, neighbors, friends kind of down the street. And that also during that decade was a tremendous learning experience for me about the opportunity there and the missed opportunity so many times of the formal system just simply not recognizing the depth of these relationships that young people have and had. I was real involved at the time. We were doing individual level advocacy. We were providing support groups. We had legal partners that were helping to advocate legally. We had, a lot going on, but we realized that the individual advocacy and support was only getting us so far, kind of one family at a time. And we started learning, frankly, through some kinship care advisory groups, but grandparents all over the state who kind of got involved in the need for systems changes and systems level advocacy. So anyway, I got to be part of that, and ultimately some pretty significant legislation passed in Tennessee. And once that legislation passed, the commissioner at the time of the State Department of Children's Services said, okay, these have passed, this kinship foster care legislation, this relative caregiver program legislation, and he called and said, okay, will you come over to the State Department of Children's Services and help implement these? And it was a big moment in my career. And I thought, okay.
Was that like an automatic yes? Did you do a lot of thinking about that?
We had been, I talked to a mentor of mine, a great mentor of mine, Andy Shookoff. And he had been the juvenile court judge. And he basically just looked at me and said, this is exactly what you need to do. This is exactly what you need to do. You've got to, when a door opens like that wide and that clearly, you've got to walk through it. And so I did, and I'm very grateful for that, and spent the next decade actually working for the State Department of Children's Services in Tennessee. And then and was very involved, like Will, in some of the lawsuit-related reforms that were happening there at the time. And then the last decade, I've been involved in national consulting primarily focused on child welfare. And then most recently, I have moved into a leadership role. For the last 3 years, I've been a regional vice president at Public Knowledge and supporting teams of management consultants doing work in health and Medicaid, child support, aging and adult services, child welfare. And that's what I'm doing.
I'm actually realizing after working with you both for 4 years and working with you for even longer, Elizabeth, how very similar, because I think, mine, although I'm an attorney, I started at like the individual case, level, working with parents or kids in child welfare. And then I realized, okay, that's not going to do so much good. And then moving up to the state systems level and then the national and then consulting. So we actually do have quite a few things in common, even though it's different backgrounds. The other thing that I was going to say is we all of us come from the child welfare background, but I'm curious do you see similarities, correlations, anything that mimics that when you are looking at, let's say, Medicaid work or child support work or other health and human services work that we do at Public Knowledge?
Well, I mean, one thing I was going to say that feels to me like the through line over that career that I wouldn't necessarily have planned or even realized, but I can sort of see in reverse is working in different capacities to, for kids to be safe, for systems to help support kids to be safe within their own families and communities. And really, at the end of the day, to keep children safe within their own families and communities. And in a way, whether it was being a special education teacher, whether it was working in a nonprofit at the state level, but even now, doing the work in health and Medicaid, doing work in behavioral health, in aging and adult services, in child welfare, the power of the resources and support and the collective of those systems coming together to help families and communities keep children safe is even more possible. Yeah.
In addition to keeping children safe, I had the experience within the last 6 months of attending a national child support conference, and the themes that were being talked about from the plenary speakers during a number of the sessions, it could have just as easily been in a child welfare conference. Yeah. It could have just as easily been in a health Medicaid conference. When we're dealing with issues of race equity, when we're dealing with issues of how do we really try to truly incorporate lived expertise, how do we think about well-being for the people who are doing the work, for the people who are receiving the services, and what that means in this day and age, these themes, these struggles are happening across the board, across the industries, and it's and in some ways that's daunting because these are serious issues, but in another way, it's it feels like some of the silo and some of the like turfism or like the specialty of this. You have to know this, you have to have this background, you have to have this certification, you have to have this degree. Some of this are very common problems, complex problems that everybody's dealing with across the industry, across how we're trying to work and serve people.
I tell you some of the, some of the work that I'm feeling so excited about, passionate about, and learning from is a small team of consultants that we have working in one jurisdiction where part of a team, we helped to generate the evidence that showed very, very clearly that for child welfare involved families in this particular jurisdiction, this one county, 7 in 10 children being separated from their families are Black or multi-race children, and 7 out of 10 children in the same jurisdiction are Black or multi-race children who are in foster care for 24 months or longer. And, again, through, generating that type of, quantitative evidence. But part of the work that our team and our partners are doing is working with community leaders and persons who are impacted by that system to really drive the whole solutioning and to do kind of the community-driven design in 3 target neighborhoods of how to impact these outcomes. And, the work is really, underway. We have a lot more to do in terms of finalizing implementation plans, evaluation plans. But I'll tell you, the answer back to your question that we're hearing loud and clear from these parents is that the solution largely resides around things like economic assistance,
Poverty,
housing, educational supports, medical being, it's very clear from that parent perspective that it's much broader than just one single system that needs to do something different or provide something different or stop doing something altogether.
Yeah, you talk about the string of your career and like looking back, I have a similar reflection. I was 20 in AmeriCorps in New York City, and I got plopped by myself in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and told to tutor kids and then help pick them up on the streets at night. It was with Covenant House, which was serving homeless youth. And I look back at that time now, decades later, and it's all the same root, right? The roots are all still there. It's poverty, it's education, it's medical, and then it's family, community supports. Like so many of those kids and families were completely alone for whatever reason. No one around them, right? There was no one in their village or in their community. And then I fast forward to where we are now, and it's all the same root, right? All those same foundational issues, no matter, like you said, no matter what area we're looking at, whether we're looking at the Medicaid population or the child welfare population or behavioral health population, even the aging population, it's all the same. So we are still challenged, right, with the same problems, the same challenges, trying to find a solution for them. So very interesting. Elizabeth, let's come back to you for a minute on a more personal level. Tell us who you are outside of work and what values you live by.
I am a wife, I'm a parent, I'm a daughter, I'm an aunt, I'm a cousin, I'm a friend. I feel very grateful for, sort of family and close friends in my life. I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I love, if I can, every single day to get outside, be in the woods, be in nature, move my body around. I love to read. I love to support my 2 stepsons who are young and upcoming filmmakers in all of their passion and interest around that. And I, at one point, one of them said, I just realized you're really never, ever going to live long enough to see everything I want you to see in terms of movies. It's dawning on me. It's not even going to be possible.
I think Will feels that with me all the time.
It's a hard realization.
It's a hard realization. But I'm loving learning and seeing more and following their passion.
It was such a gift for me to be able to see their movie and documentary. They're really lovely humans.
Yeah.
What about your values?
I don't know. As I get older, the things I value, I really, as I kind of talked about in terms of my career, I really have just for a long time been very focused on, families really are the most important. And honoring those family relationships. So that kind of value is deeply just part of who I am and what I'm about. Part of also what I really, I guess, value or try to place emphasis on is, living authentically, living and being sort of present, doing the kinds of things where I'm self-aware and addressing my own issues so that the people that I'm working with, the people who I'm living with, the people who are on projects that I'm on, that I'm bringing my best self, bringing, joy, and just being present and focused. And a little bit like Will, too, at this point in my career, I am placing a lot of value and loving supporting newer management consultants and people earlier in their careers. And I'm having so much fun celebrating some of their accomplishments and setbacks and struggles. And I'm just loving that, actually.
One of the things with when I think about Elizabeth's values, when I think about your values, Stacey, and I said this earlier, it was, I was young, I was a young adult, young in my career, and just like the belief that change is possible, and the belief that people have strengths and that things can improve, an optimistic outlook, even when there's adversity, even when
Especially when there's adversity.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that I like working with you and a number of our colleagues who, that's a value that's shared and a way of trying to do the work. And like in our work, if you don't have that, it's, and particularly in, and there's always challenging times, but with some of the loss of hope, you talked about joy, some of the concerns, I think that's important. And I think that's something I see in Elizabeth and in you, Stacey, and hopefully in me.
Yeah, you do. And I think it's hope and resiliency, right? Because I think that, as we said, we're still working on the same challenges that we all started working on at the beginning of our career. So it's seeing both the hope and being able to come and jump back from and find and, reiterate, retry, try again, take another stab at it.
It's interesting that you say that. Okay, like looking back 30 years or 20 years or earlier in our careers that, that we see for families so many of the same issues. But I think, as we roll into this 2024 year, as we're kind of focused on what do we actually believe about impact? What have we learned about generating and using evidence? Where have we seen progress? What do we believe for the future? Yeah. That is kind of the question that we're talking about today.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'll just say for me, the two examples where I have seen the most progress, if I really think about it. And again, it's not across the country with 330 million people all at the same time. That's not what I mean. But where have we collectively seen progress happen? One is, in my career, seeing the link between and experiencing the link between top leaders in a large public sector system who were incredibly clear about not 50 outcomes, not 25 outcomes, but at the end of the day, 3 core outcomes that these leaders were firmly committed to and very clear about communicating those 3 outcomes. In this particular instance, it was children in foster care, exiting foster care to families. It was those children going home and not re-entering foster care. And thirdly, foster care as a very short-term support. So reducing the actual length of time that children were separated from their own families and communities. Again, 3 clear outcomes. And not only being out there talking about it at a high level, not only being out there being clear about it in terms of communication, but doing really 3 other things around it. One being, incorporating practices into a practice model that were designed to actually get to those outcomes and doing a lot of work to get to that level of what are those practices. Secondly, having the analytic capabilities to actually generate the evidence about baselines in those areas across the board, broken down at the county level, broken down by supervisor, broken down by provider agency so that you could really understand the variation, and then having the evidence to track progress over time. Who's making progress, who's not, who's struggling, what can we learn from that? And then the last part of it was linking financing to a demonstration of improvement in those outcomes.
Paying for outcomes.
Paying for
rather than
outcomes.
for seats or services.
And I will tell you, it did not happen immediately, but I will tell you, sticking to those core components and really coming together with those core components had a tremendous impact in that local place at that period of time around a large system coming together around changing for the better around a handful of outcomes. That's sort of one example for me. The other one where I feel like we are collectively learning, where I do think we're seeing demonstrations of progress, is the leadership that's coming from persons who've been impacted by these systems.
Human-centered design and community.
I really do think so. Yeah. And I think we're seeing that collective have a real impact in moving things forward. Like, even if I think back on that Tennessee example, it was that collective of grandparents and other relatives all across the state that at the end of the day had a big impact on the kind of some of the more substantive changes I think that did end up happening in terms of public policy.
So let's talk a bit about the theme before we get too far. So our theme this year for the podcast is generating and using evidence to drive impact, which interestingly enough is at the heart of our organization as well. Impact is one of our 3 core values. We've been working very hard over the last 3 or 4 years to make sure that we can internally and with partners generate and use evidence so that we know what works, right, and what doesn't. And if it doesn't, stop doing it. And if it works, keep doing it. It sounds simple. It's a lot more complicated than that. But I thought what might be helpful is let's start with why this topic? Why do we think it's so important? And why do we think it's so important right now, not just for our work at Public Knowledge, but also for our clients' work?
For me, it has been a progression from, like I said, I was part of the early rounds of the Child and Family Service Review process and saw jurisdictions struggle to understand what is the data, what is the evidence, what do we know about this problem, and then what does that mean to try to put strategies in place to impact this, and the myriad of issues that go with implementing strategies, monitoring them, and then being able to make a change. So that was like when my eyes were really open to how challenging and difficult this is. Over the last 3 years, I've dealt with medical conditions to where, so it started out with a diagnosis and had a doctor say, we've got to get you somewhere else. You need more expertise to understand what is happening here. So that was a professional who I respect, but he was making an assessment. We're not able to really understand this. So I go to another institution, and they had questions about the original diagnosis. They did more tests, they gathered more information, and they altered the diagnosis, which drove what my treatment was going to be. And so now, I'm at a place to where I've been on a cycle of, varying timelines, but days to weeks to 3 months at a time to 6 months at a time, but of the gathering data, the really trying to understand what's the evidence showing here, and then what does that mean of what we're going to do. So I've experienced that in such a personal, upfront way that it's impacted how I view this with work, and it's being open to curiosity, open to questions, being willing to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, willing to say, we need help, we need other expertise, willing to doggedly go after what's the information that we need to understand what is happening here to make the best decisions we can, but then always be ready to alter that, strengthen that based on what we further learn. Stacey, one of the things you do in a number of situations is, do we have everything out on the table? Do we have all the data? Do we have all the information? And you ask that question at vital times to where the group may be ready to maybe get to a quicker solution, to where, wait a minute, we don't fully understand what's happening here. And so to your question, like I've known it professionally for a number of years, and it's hard. And it's hard to do what, like Elizabeth was describing in the example. And then with my own personal experience of this, when it's when you're reliant upon an expert, when you're reliant upon somebody to be that's giving you advice and trying to help you move forward in a positive direction, it's made it clear to me around what are the right questions, what's the information that we're gathering, how valid is it. People have to understand it, have to have a sense of, yes, I see where this is coming from. I put value into this. And then what does that mean for what our next steps are? So that's why I think this is so important.
Elizabeth, anything else for the importance of the topic or the theme?
I mean, well, I just want to kind of say, I mean, you know, Will, your experience of this diagnosis and medical condition, and your experience has obviously, you know, it has impacted all of us in so many ways. And in a way, we're all learning from you too. And it is having an impact on us individually and us in the collective. And you have, I don't know, just been incredibly inspiring.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate that. But, you know, it's these things that, these phrases that we use, that the field uses, that different people use, you know, we've talked about and we've tried to implement data-driven decision-making.
Yeah, which I cringe every time I hear it because it's become so...
Because it becomes trite.
Yeah, exactly.
But it becomes trite. But I'll tell you,
But at the heart,
in like the example with my personal experience that I'm talking about here, watching very smart, committed, passionate people using the information to make critical decisions about, are we moving forward today with this? Like imminently, are we doing this right now? Are we going to do this as opposed to that? And of being able to, on a sheet of paper with a pen, with you and your loved one sitting next to you, draw it out and go, this is why I'm recommending that this is what we're doing. That's a level of clarity. And so then that's not trite. You know, that's not trite. That is moving forward in a way of what's the evidence telling us, what's our skill, our understanding, our background telling us, and how are we making the best decision here. And I think there's times that that's hard to do, and there's times that people take shortcuts for various reasons. To be very thoughtful, very methodical is so important. And, you know, we're in our roles, we're at a place that can be one of those voices saying, where's the data? Where's the evidence? Do we have everything that we need? Are there other questions that need to be asked here? Does somebody else need to be at the table?
Well, you're striking me so much in your language around, at the start, are we asking the right question or questions? And then from there, how do we, in a methodologically sound way, figure out how to answer that question so that we collectively have that information? And just in the way you say that, Will, with such clarity, I do think that's why we feel passionate about this in the work that we do as management consultants, largely in child welfare, largely in health and Medicaid, aging and adult services, child support, is that I think we all are so aware from our own experiences how often major decisions are being made across the board by families and for families that are delinked from the questions and delinked from the actual evidence. You know, you think about child welfare alone, federally funded $29 billion. And, you know, how much of that would we say right now is, you know, directly being invested based on the evidence?
Producing the outcomes that we want it to produce. It's not. I think we all know that. So when let's break it down a little bit. So when we talk about evidence, let's share with our listeners, what do we mean there? What could the evidence be?
Well, I think there's a distinction between, you know, data and evidence. There's a lot of data. We all have access to 1 million points of data. Qualitative, quantitative, case management systems contain a lot of data. And I think the evidence that we're talking about is, how do you curate the kind of true evidence that is culled together in a way to answer the kinds of questions and that is kind of actionable for leaders and stakeholders to make decisions from. And it's that kind of care and curated work that I think we're really talking about in terms of evidence.
I think if we look at our clients, they're drowning in data.
I do too.
Because the last, decade, maybe two, has been all about, you have no data, get more data, right? You're not looking at data, so look at it. And if I look at any of, our clients, no matter what industry they're in, they're completely overwhelmed with data. It's coming at them from multiple systems, multiple places. It's coming at them every day. So I think the question is, what's the most valuable? And I think, actually, back to your example, right? What are the one, two, three most important ones we need to be looking at that answer whatever question it is that we're trying to solve? I think that is the biggest challenge that at least our clients and our team are faced with, because they also have a lot of data that they're getting.
It's interesting because when you think about what can be learned from talking with someone to understand what their experience is, what their needs are, and then marrying that with some of the data that Elizabeth's been talking about with, all right, we know this about this group of people who are being served. So, what's the quantitative numbers telling us? Who is that? And then what are they experiencing, and how are we gathering that information? Experience,
perception, yeah.
And then qualitative and then what does that mean around how of what the strategy is, what the intervention is, what the plan is, and how is that used, and how's it used? Elizabeth used the term delinked. Thinking about the time that decisions are made at whatever level, based on whatever information, as opposed to what is the quantitative data telling us, what's the qualitative data telling us, what have we been able to analyze and process through, and have a broad perspective of viewpoints thinking about this, and then what does that mean for what we're actually going to do? And then how do we continue that in being able to monitor and move forward and adjust?
Well, and I think the number of times that we're either not asking the right question or we're solving for the wrong problem is mind-boggling. Because I think that often it's either a Band-Aid approach to something, or it's literally solving one problem when here's this other big problem out here that we're completely ignoring. So I think it's so important to be clear about what the challenge is, what the evidence is, which can be a lot of different things, right? It doesn't even have to always be data or quantitative data, but what is it that's supporting that or answering it? And then how do we move forward? So moving forward and looking at impact, one of our core values at PK is impact. And we've created the podcast all around it. And that's kind of why we've got this theme for this year as well. So impact to us means that we approach every project with our energy focused on identifying the right goals, outcomes, and strategies, and that we each have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on our projects and our world. So if we look a little bit deeper, right, at impact, I'm curious, what type of impact do you hope to have, either you individually, us collectively as a firm, or us and our clients? Like, what type of impact do you hope to have, and on whom?
That's a great question, and it's making me think back to a night around a table with colleagues, and we were talking about what we were proud of. And that night, one of the examples that we talked about was identifying a safety issue. This was child welfare based, identifying a safety issue that was relevant across a statewide system that was not being addressed. And through just the question, through gathering the information about it, and through identifying the issue, then the jurisdiction, with assistance and support, was able to start tackling it. Yeah. And so that was sitting around a table talking about what are we doing, what are we proud of. So so when I think about what impact do we want to have, for me, it comes down to, when you're really thinking about the amount of time that you spend with your chosen career, with your colleagues that you're working on, at the end of the day, what's different for the families being served, whatever the scenario is, whatever the service is, how is that better? How is that making people safer, more healthy, addressing their well-being issues? Yeah. And there's examples of that. And the other thing with that is we have to take time to talk about that, to kind of challenge each other. What impact are we having? Yeah. What are we proud of?
Right, exactly.
Elizabeth, what do you think? What type of impact do you hope to have, and on whom? What does driving impact mean to you?
Part of what was going through my mind with that question, what does having an impact kind of mean to you? Kind of building on, I think, what Will just said, I do think half of the issue or more is the clarity of being conscious and present to, here is the actual impact on a person, on a family, on an employee, on my colleague that I'm intending to have. That sort of consciousness, presence, mindfulness in our work. That, in my mind, is one major part of it. And then kind of the stick-to-itiveness of, all right, what is it actually going to take? Not me individually, but me and us and our team. How are we going to get to that outcome, or how are we going to support that outcome kind of happening? There's 2 books that I've been rereading recently that kind of are informing me right now. One is the Heifetz and Linsky Leadership on the Line, and one of them is the Dorothy Roberts Torn Apart. And the questions that are going through my mind, again, in rereading kind of both of those books, in relation to the question impact, the Leadership on the Line for me is always a reminder of, when you are talking about real impact, being conscious of that, being present to that, but it takes bravery, it takes risk, it takes loss, it takes stick-to-itiveness, and the things that you have to do as a leader to hold your center, to let things sort of heat up, and also to keep yourself in a position where, in a way, you're not taken out. Do you know what I'm saying? And that, when we think about ourselves, of course, as a team of consultants providing support, but that also is relevant for the leaders who we're working with, and the kind of impact they're aiming for, the types of risks, the type of loss, the type of impact they're seeking, that all is so relevant. And then the Dorothy Roberts, is so clear and just a kind of an ever-present question of who has the power for decision-making, where does that need to rest? And part of impact is to also assess what do we need to start doing and do better, and what also do we need to stop doing? And what does that mean in terms of direction of resources and support?
Because we learn, I think that the important part of the start doing, stop doing, keep doing analysis is that part of all of this is we're going to try things that aren't going to work. And we have to be able to look at something, right? Look at the evidence and say, oh, this isn't working. Let's stop, rather than continue just because we decided that was the best intervention or the best strategy. And we don't want to have, this idea of kind of lost time and lost effort, but be brave enough to say, this isn't working. Let's stop this now.
Exactly.
Let's not put any more investment of time, energy, and resources into it and try something different. And I think that is hard and it's risky, but it is so much of, and I think part of, and I've said this so many times over the last year, probably on this podcast too, so unfortunately, but I do think it comes up, especially with the new consultants that we are bringing on, this idea that failing is bad, right? Or trying something and it's not working is going to end in, disaster, when really that's the whole point of driving impact, is to fail, but fail quickly and fail faster and fail in less risky ways so that we know, okay, that doesn't work. Like, keep going. What's next? Keep going. And I think that's the part of the drive that's so important, right? Because we can get so focused on the end and the strategy and so invested in our strategies and our ideas that it's hard. And me too, I fall victim to this all the time when I come up with an idea and I think it's wonderful and brilliant and I love it and I get so attached to it that I can't look at the data in front of me to go, whoa, that's not working. We got to try something different, right? So being able to fail fast and fail quickly and then keep iterating, right? Keep coming up with new ideas and new creativity and new innovation and finding new ways. It really is a drive, right? We're turning left, we're coming back around, we're going about the roundabout, and then we're turning right, and then, oh, that didn't work. Let's start back at the beginning. And I think that is what drives impact. But if we're constantly focused on this intervention is going to work because I came up with it, or this intervention is going to work because so-and-so did it, or whatever state did it, and we get so invested in that path, or our path, what we think is the right path, that we don't take the time to look at the evidence, to generate it and look at it, or, change tactics.
Well, and that's the bravery. That's the courage for all of us as consultants, as expert advisors,
as leaders,
to be able to, as leaders, to be able to say to a client, gosh, you've been investing in something for, I'm making it up, 6 months here. Yeah. We've been implementing with fidelity. Here, the early indications are, we all thought it was going to work. You are supporting it and leading it. We have some, but I mean, the stick-to-itiveness of having the evidence that we're either on track or we're not on track, but the courage and bravery for everybody to come together to make a different decision if we're not making progress.
To go back to like the question of the impact of what are we looking for, and just to continue playing the example out, and this is like we were talking about asking the right question, but then it's also being very clear early on, what are we targeting? What do we want to achieve?
Right.
We want to achieve remission.
Right.
If you make it this many months, that is a milestone and a marker, and this is what the statistics, the data, the information tells us. That is applicable across the board of whatever whatever the problem is, whatever we're looking at and trying to have an impact on, trying to change, trying to improve. What is the measure and what's the goal and what are we looking at? And then doggedly measuring and unrelentlessly, eyes wide open, bravery,
Yeah.
not having ego tied up into it, not having some sense of this has to work.
Yeah.
I know that there's a number of times in my career when there's been leaders who have been able to clearly articulate the goal, and we're gathering the evidence and the information for them to know, are we making progress there? And if we're not, what does that mean? And then there's examples where there hasn't been a clear desired impact.
No. Just keep going.
There's been this feels right.
Yeah. My gut.
So many other people are doing this.
Exactly.
But of really, what are we wanting to get out of this? And then when you add in the human-centered design of it becoming a broader question than just the agency person or the consultant it's really all those involved, and then what's our desired state? What are we wanting to move to?
I think if we look at the work that we do for clients, right, we're solving problems that haven't been solved before. We're working with our clients, right, on a team to collectively solve them. We're often not solving them by ourselves. And we look at the environments, right, that our clients work within, and all the various pressures. We were talking about this yesterday, all the various pressures that our clients have, both internally, from leadership, from political pressure, external regulations here, rules there. I do think that at the end of the day, there are two things that are completely necessary in order to do that work. And one of them I've talked about a lot, right, which is healthy teams. I don't think that one person is going to solve any of these problems.
Right.
And if we don't have a healthy, inclusive, diverse team of diverse ideas that can come to the table, and we can have healthy conflict about it, we're never going to get to the right solution. But I think the other piece is this: if we're not looking at what's working and what's not, if we're not focused on the evidence of whatever generative idea that we came up with, no matter the creativity that we had, right, or the innovation that we had to go into it, if we're not watching whether or not it's working, we're not going to have impact. And so I think that's why, for me, that's why this is the theme, right? Because if we're not looking and we're not constantly having our eye on it, or helping our clients to make sure that they have their eye on it, we're going to miss the mark always, right? It's always going to go off on the wrong way. You might every once in a while get lucky and accidentally end up with the right thing, but not often. And it's because we're not solving things that have been solved before, right? And we're not solving simple problems. They're complex. It's, almost always involving systems change, which is ridiculously complicated because you're not just dealing with the technical problems, but you're dealing with the people, relational, and adaptive problems. And I think that's, for me, why that's so important.
I'm so glad you're saying that. I mean, then saying it that clearly, because if you think about really a highly aligned, clear-hearted team working together to get to that, have the desired impact, and the team is open-hearted, clear-hearted in their way of relating with each other, that's when I believe real change actually is possible and when we have seen it. Yeah. But there are all those things that get in the way of healthy leaders, healthy teams, and all the other personal things that can get in our way of our own leadership. I love you just made that clarity statement because I think you're right.
Well, I think of the times that ego or lack of diversity on a team, or the inability of someone to feel comfortable to speak up, or again, just being so tied into whatever solution you came up with and loving it so much. And I've been there, right? You're like, this is the best idea I've ever come up with. I'm never going to come up with a better idea in my career. And it's like the little baby that you don't want to let go of, right? And then you see all the evidence stacking up that that's not the right solution. It's not the right idea, but you don't want to let go of it.
Well, but that's the mindfulness and self-awareness part of the healthy teams, healthy leadership, to be sort of self-aware enough to be open and ready for the actual evidence and where that evidence leads.
Terrible idea.
Yeah.
Stop that.
And it kind of be okay, you know?
I had one of those recently, as well knows. I'm like, that was a terrible idea. Please pull that back. Well, so I thought maybe what we could do is give like a little case studies to our listeners about how this might apply in like a real world situation. And I don't want to talk about our clients in particular, so we won't mention who they are, but I'm hoping you can each think of a example, either current or past, where we might be able to dig into how you have generated and used evidence to drive impact or drive change with a team or with a client. So I'll give you a minute to think about it. And then I don't know which of you wants to go first, but I'm going to just kind of pepper you with some questions about it.
Maybe we can, there's an example that this may be a joint response to.
Okay.
So we had an experience working with a jurisdiction where they wanted to strengthen and enhance their practice model. And
tell us a bit about what a practice model is for those
so
not in the child welfare field.
so this is in a child welfare setting, and it's really laying out what the agency values, what they see as important, and how that actually plays out in terms of the way of work, of the behaviors, of the way that the people within the agency that are working with families are interacting, how they're doing joint planning, how they're so this is what we believe, and these are the behaviors that will help you carry out the type of work that the agency is wanting to take place with families. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
And in that setting, so we did work with the state, and we had 3 specific counties where we did some work with those local county people to train, roll out the enhanced practice model. And coinciding with that, they were doing some work with their continuous quality improvement efforts, and they were doing some work around a case review process that was being regularly done. It was being done with fidelity. It was being done with a tool that people understood, people valued. And so the timing of this was great because they were wanting to impact these measures that were showing up in casework that they were gathering information on through random case reviews.
So let's take a step back. What was the desired impact? What was the outcome that you guys were trying to get to, or that the client was trying to get to?
The desired impact was to strengthen how the social worker, caseworker who was working with the families, those what was happening during those interactions, and what that was resulting in different measurable ways with the case in terms of timeliness of some actions happening, the quality of say the contact and the planning, and then actually looking at some of the measures around safety, well-being of the children and the parents involved.
So was it increased time with families, increased engagement? Was that because the new practice model, I'm assuming, had some sort of anticipated outcome that they were trying to drive at?
Yes, like increased engagement, looking at are the safety considerations in the family scoring higher on the measures associated with that.
I mean, my memory on it is that, this particular jurisdiction was at the time under federal class action lawsuit, also operating under the kind of, federal safety, permanency, well-being outcomes. And in this particular instrument, my memory is, that there were probably, I can't remember exactly how many, but 6 to 8 measures that were quantitative measures related to safety, permanency, and well-being, and that impact on families. So it wasn't all of the possible measures in those areas, but it was looking at a handful in terms of actual impact on families. And then there were also kind of process measures to really assess to what extent do we know that the workers, that the supervisors, that the county leaders are behaving in ways that either align or don't align with the practice model.
So the way that you just described that, just real quick, because someone said fidelity earlier, and I realized our listeners probably don't know what that means, but the way you just described that, Elizabeth, for me is the fidelity. So that the process measures to make sure that they are operating within that practice model, it would be how we would show fidelity.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
And the exciting part of this example is, so there was the desire to improve how the agency caseworkers, social workers were interacting, engaging, working with families, and to improve those safety, permanency, well-being measures. They had a process in place to gather that information.
Did they have it before?
That's yes. So we had baseline. So we had baseline information.
So you were using data that was already there.
Yes, and then we go in and help them with their strategy, with their intervention, with this training, and saw measurable improvement in the cases that were being reviewed. So for the jurisdiction, for the county leaders, they were able to look at what was happening there, what was happening with the training, what was happening with the coaching, what was happening with rolling this out, what were they seeing in terms of change in practice, what were they hearing, and then what were these measures showing from this case review process.
So it sounds like you were using and generating evidence, because it sounds like you were using evidence that was already there to show improved outcomes or to show impact, but you were also generating process-based fidelity evidence to show that there was fidelity to the new model.
Well, and I mean, I'm looking at Will to correct me if I'm not remembering this, but part of what I do think we learned from this work, again, in 3 targeted counties, was that 2 of the counties, we were able to see evidence of fidelity, that the practices were happening, not 100%, but, for early implementation, yes. I think we were pleased with practicing in alignment with the practice model. And, our team was doing, support in terms of training, messaging, communication, but really pretty deep coaching at the time, kind of support. So in 2 of the counties, we had evidence of fidelity, and we also had evidence of impact. In 1 of the counties, we had a lot of evidence of the lack of fidelity. And then you didn't see the impact on outcomes, but we could sort of see the 2 in comparison. I mean, is that your memory of that?
Absolutely.
How did the client, or how did you and the client work together to define what success was? Like define not the fidelity part, but the outcomes and the impact. How did you decide on those 6 or 8 measures?
Because there was alignment with the practice model. So what the behaviors that they were wanting to encourage, increase, support is what was being measured through the case review process. It was thinking that through from the very beginning of why were they wanting to strengthen the practice model to begin with, and then what was that going to entail, and down the road, what's the impact? What is the anticipated expected result of this?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they had negotiated with plaintiffs in this lawsuit for the outcomes that they were committed and believed that they could demonstrate progress on. Yeah. And I think their theory of change in bringing us in as a partner was, at the end of the day, if we can better define our practice model, better define a set of practices that we think would actually, if implemented with fidelity, would get to these outcomes, that's our theory of change. And our theory of change is, in part, we're going to need some implementation support to get there. And, I think that was part of our experience. So we really worked on further developing their practice model and worked on the coaching support and training support to implement that practice model with fidelity.
But the ultimate impact was permanency, safety, and well-being.
Absolutely.
And then it wasn't all the measures under all of them.
No,
There was a few of them.
Yeah, 6 to 8 is what I remember, but
And it was likely something that they worked on with the court monitors.
exactly.
But it was measures that they valued. I mean, it was it was
They weren't
it was measures that they wanted to see improved.
Great.
I think that's a huge piece, right?
Yes.
If you're driving towards progress and something that you don't care about, it is awfully hard to stay focused on.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, I'm the reason I'm making that distinction is this was not thrust upon there was complete desire, agreement, focus that we want this to happen for.
How often were you guys looking at the evidence, both the outcome data and the fidelity data?
I mean, I know we set up the CQI plan to be quarterly. We would be looking at some basic data sets, but I can't remember in terms of the case review. I feel like that might have been twice a year. I can't quite remember that, but we tried to have a basic set of metrics every quarter.
Okay. And then it sounds like you learned that if there was fidelity to the model, the outcomes improved. What else did you learn through that? What was the evidence telling you?
Well, with the example that we're talking about, we saw in jurisdictions where the environment and the setting was conducive to being able to go in and do the training, do the coaching, to carry out the changed behaviors, then we were seeing improvement. The jurisdiction where we were not seeing improvement, the environment and the setting to be able to go in and roll the training out, support it by coaching, have there being a change in what's happening with the families, there were barriers to that. And the barriers were around some county-specific challenges within the structure, within relationship with external providers. There were barriers.
So they were people relationship adaptive.
Well, that's
challenges,
exactly what I was
not
about to
technical.
say. It came right back to your point about impact.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, that particular county where we did not show fidelity, where we did not show the kind of impact that we saw in the other two, came right back around to healthy teams, healthy leadership. And it also, in a way, like if I'm thinking about it, I hadn't thought about this in a little bit, but honestly, we had enough information even early on that we were concerned about team functioning, about kind of capability to do the implementation fidelity. And in a way, like this whole conversation around at what point do we have the kind of bravery? Do we have the enough information to work to make a different decision?
You may have, so you saw that there were leadership or team challenges or people challenges, but you still had to move forward knowing that without being able to fix that before fixing the other.
Well, and that's part of the challenge is, through this conversation, we've used terms of hope. We've used terms of bravery. We've used terms of optimism.
Yeah.
And so that gets into the challenge of doing this type of work. When you're trying to transform something, when you're trying to make change. And also realistically, if you do three different, we purposely were in three different places because there were different characteristics, there were different challenges. So that was purposely. The fact that we were not making sustained similar progress everywhere is not surprising, but there is a part of this discussion that's very relevant around this is if you are going to use the evidence, if you're going to gather it, if you're going to use it, then that means when is the right time to start asking those questions of, is this working here? Why is this not working here? we're seeing these challenges distinctly here. And not that we weren't doing that, but hindsight is always 20/20 of should something have been said earlier, what's the way to move forward with that. And those are challenging scenarios.
Or even pivoting in terms of the strategy.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
the actual, in that instance, we kind of kept our head down to let's implement the training coaching plan. Do you know what I'm saying? We've got a plan, let's implement it. What might have happened if we had pulled back and said,
yeah, so what's interesting to me, I feel like this is where our implementation, and I'm going off on a limb here. So
Sure.
Follow me or don't. Go on. I think this is where implementation science and support completely aligns with the change management. Because you went full speed ahead on implementation,
Yes,
the technical implementation, right? The science, the support. Here's how we do it. Here's our process for it. But what change management would show, right, potentially, had it been aligned, is we would have been generating evidence to show that people weren't ready for it.
Right,
They weren't ready for the change.
right.
There were other barriers there.
Right.
And we would have said, okay, let's deal with those barriers before.
Right.
Let's win over, because in the whole change management, it's win over the hearts and minds of people, right? And that's the people side of it. So it's like the implementation side of the people side, the people weren't ready for it in one county. They were in other two. So those two, yes, go forward. This one, let's take a step back. Let's work on awareness. Let's work on teams. Let's work on leadership. Let's work on knowledge before we bring in the actual technical change. And I actually think, this is, I think for us, right? Like how do we mold those two together so that we are preparing for both the adaptive and the technical?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to talk about that because, honestly, we even had a readiness assessment. You know what I mean? We did have a readiness assessment.
And what did it show?
But I don't think we actually paid attention to the evidence from the readiness assessment. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And maybe I'm overstating that. Maybe, you know what I mean? But we did have a readiness assessment.
So how did your work in that jurisdiction or on that project, how did it contribute to progress over the time with our work or with future clients' work?
In one way, like over time, it underscores the need around capacity to do this type of work. So to be able to gather the right data, gather the right information, you have to have the capacity to, like with the example here, we were talking about case reviews, but whatever the strategy is, you have to have the internal capacity to gather and manage the data, analyze it in a way, and be able to present it in a way that is meaningful.
Consumable, meaningful, influential, understandable. Yeah, so important.
And so I think with the example that we're giving, it added to, all right, if this is going to be our way of work, if it's going to be important for us to generate evidence and use it, then we've got to work internally on our capacity about being able to have the foundations in place to be able to do that. And, that means not only gathering the information, but then also being able to clearly identify what are the key performance indicators, what are the measures, what is available to us, what are the right questions, and how do we go about moving forward with that. And there's skills and there's knowledge around doing that. And Stacey, going back to what you said, translating that into a way that's consumable and understandable and actionable.
It's always surprising to me when any of our team members say, well, this isn't a data project. We're not dealing with data. And so I do think that's why for me, especially this year, it's expanding our view on what evidence is and expanding our view on, okay, no matter what work we're doing, we should be paying attention to what's the ultimate impact or outcome that we want to have and what evidence is going to show us whether we're headed there. And that should be on every one of the 172 projects, not on a data project. Right?
I completely agree. And early in my career, I envisioned the conference room a couple hundred miles east of here. It was reinforced for me the importance of self-assessment, of being able to identify a challenge, a problem, understand it, and then gather what's needed to really have a full understanding of what's happening, and then doing something about it.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, that's the process, and continue doing that. And said that way, it sounds well, that's simple, that's straightforward, but it's complex. And to your point, that's not a data project related issue. That's any problem you're dealing with in human services, in the industries that we work with. It's
probably in life.
In life, that's no, you're absolutely right.
I can't think of one where it's not. I mean, coming back to your medical issues, I do. I think it is in anything in life, whether it's kids or family or health or work.
Right.
So we've talked about a couple different lessons learned that you have from that project, potentially kind of looking at the readiness assessment, potentially looking at the people side. Are there any other lessons learned that you can share with the listeners who might be working on a similar project, or that you brought forward into future projects?
I mean, I will say, like, looking back on it, I think another lesson learned that I would want to do better the next time around is really the kind of deep engagement with persons impacted by that system. You know, I don't think we had as strong connection in terms of the real deep engagement, leaning towards like community-driven design versus more token feedback in the process. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that's a big lesson learned as I look back on that particular set of work.
Anything that you would highlight, Pearl?
I think I agree with Elizabeth with that. I think the other thing is when you're working in large systems, and Elizabeth was making this point earlier in our discussion, top-level leadership, buy-in and understanding and commitment, continuing to encourage that and to meaningfully bolster that through new information, through it's complicated, even though I was saying these are measures that were important to them, and they were, and I believe that. But oftentimes in systems, depending on what the chief challenge that's happening, the new crisis that comes up, some of these efforts, when you're trying to change behaviors and change practice, it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes and so using the evidence to make sure everyone is updated, informed continually, and what does that mean moving forward? I think we can always do a better job with that. And that there's better ways to, of how do you communicate that? How are we always doing that?
And I think that comes back to organizational change management practices.
Exactly.
It's how are we not just allowing it to happen, hoping it's happening, wishing it's happening, but how do we plan for those strategies that will ensure communication, awareness, knowledge, and ultimately change, right? From one thing to another.
Yeah.
Okay. Before I wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share on our theme for 2024 or on our little case study example? Or on life?
I'm going to, I would like to share because optimism is a good thing. And earlier when I talked about the experience at the child support conference, the fact that a number of organizations, a number of people are seriously looking at racial equity issues, are seriously looking at voices from those who are being served or those who are being impacted by what's happening. The movement, we're going to have a future podcast is going to be with Jennifer Haight with the Children's Bureau, who's been instrumental in continuing to push the way that the federal government is trying to work with jurisdictions around the quantitative and the aggregate data measures that are available to them, and it being more readily available, more regularly distributed, and it being more contextual, more consumable. There being context, it breaking down information to better understand who's being served. Those are, so when you're at a point that you're able to look back earlier in your career to now, and the fact that these issues are being taken on in a real way, and it's hard, and there's times that there's 2 steps forward, and it feels like 2 steps back at times, but to continue, I think that that's positive, and I think that we're working in a time where, with the technologies that are available to us, with what's possible for us, we can continue moving forward in a really exciting way, and to where then those dinners, when you're getting a chance to talk with your colleagues about what are we proud of, there being more evidence involved, and look at what this client was able to do, or this jurisdiction was able to do, or this team that we were a part of was able to do, and how we know it happened.
I would just add, I love Will's word around optimism. And part of what this conversation is, I don't know, it's been such a fun conversation to have that is striking me. And that is, when we think about impact, when we think about leaving the people around us better off because we've been working with them or spending time with them, the thing this conversation has really had an impact on me about is, I really, at the end of the day, believe it is through optimism, through our great-heartedness, through our openness, through our clarity of what it is that we're actually trying to do. And as you said, kind of helping when there are strong teams aligned around that, strong, diverse, healthy teams aligned around that, that's where I think we see impact. I think that's when we've seen impact in our own lives and careers. I think it's where we've seen impact with our clients. And in terms of some of the technical issues that kind of come around that and after that, effective approaches to implementation, using methodologically sound ways of generating evidence. In many ways, those are important and those are hard, and we've got to do those well. But the hardest work is, I think, Stacey, what you raised is the people, the alignment, the clarity, the bravery, the commitment. And once we have that, I think we do collectively have a lot of the technical support that goes along with supporting.
And I actually, Elizabeth, was reflecting on what you said earlier. I think a huge part of it is each one of us individually taking a responsibility for being in the present moment and being mindful enough to not let our own trauma eke out on everyone around us.
Yes.
And it seems so simple, and it's such a hard, monumental task that if we don't all stay focused on it, we unintentionally or intentionally harm many things around us, and not just the people around us, but the work we're trying to accomplish and the impact that we're trying to have on communities and people and families. And I think that is, the team dynamics are, a bear among themselves, but so much would be taken care of if we all were present and mindful about how we are impacting others and how our own things are coming out at other people.
Yes.
And that's something that we can each, I'm in control of that. That's an easy It's not easy. It's not easy. Let me take that back. It's an easy, I don't have to rely on anyone else to do that work, right? Like that's work I can do on my own, and that I've spent, as you know, a significant amount of time over the last 2 or 3 years focusing on for me, for myself. But the part that's easy about it is that's not reliant on what Will is doing or what Elizabeth's doing or what our clients are doing or what's happening in the world, right? Or what's happening with politics in the state or with, regulations. I'm in complete control.
Exactly.
Of that. And that is so much like the biggest hurdle to get over. And if I can focus on that, and if everyone is focusing on that, how much easier the work would be. And it's not easy. I'll take that back.
I mean, at the end of the day, that really is what I believe.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, well, to close out every podcast, we do a little fun exercise. Okay. Pretty quick, but just having each of you share some of your wisdom and your advice with our listeners. And so we built this podcast around one of our 3 core values, impact, but the other 2 are, we've brought them up a couple times, equally as important. To close out, I'm hoping that you'll share your thoughts on our other 2 core values. No pressure, it's just whatever comes to mind first for you. So the first question is, what is your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the workplace?
In a way, ironically, I think it's in part exactly what we're saying. Yeah. Each of us individually doing our own work to deal with our own fears, our own trauma, become more self-aware, be listening, and open to curious. Yeah. And through that presence, through that listening, through that curiosity, I think that goes a long way in building inclusive teams.
I think open ourselves up to thinking about, are we at a place to where we're having the right questions asked? Who actually is around the table? What are we looking at? How do we do this in a way? And then also, I think there's this challenge, and particularly thinking about virtual scenarios versus face-to-face, and time pressures that everyone is under. Of how do we be efficient? How do we move forward? How do we move on to the next point? And we've got to force ourselves to rethink that. Yeah. And I find myself asking more of who needs to be a part of this. I think that I have in the past, because I'm realizing that I'm not always thinking broad enough to think about whose voice needs to be heard here.
Well, and we don't have all the data on the table if we don't have all the people that have the data.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. What is your best advice for achieving high levels of teamwork in the workplace?
I think 2 things. The importance of having some structure around what's the purpose of the team, what type of decisions are they going to be making. I think to have strong teams, that's a core basic need. And if that's not being taken care of and addressed, you're behind the 8 ball. I also think when you're functioning as in a team, trying to make sure that we're encouraging grace, we're encouraging opportunity for people to be heard, we're encouraging, if somebody's not there yet, comfortable with what's happening, that there's room to deal with that, but then balancing that over, and I was just talking about it earlier, balancing that with the need to move forward and make progress and solve problems.
And try things out. Yeah.
Yes.
Make decisions.
and so to answer the question, I think it's real clear structure up front, and then attending to that through the life of the team, and then really trying to encourage some grace, and I think that's upon all the team members. I think everybody plays a role in that, of how you're interacting with each other.
Yeah, as I have learned more and been on more teams and had more experiences, I think the evolution that I've gone through in terms of effective teams is, you know, probably earlier in my career, I was much more focused on, okay, we've got the team, we've got a clear plan. Here's what everybody's doing, roles and responsibilities. Let's execute the plan. And so a very technical way of approaching, in a way, the team. I'm being too simplistic.
Yeah.
But the more and more experiences that I've had is that, you know, doing all of the work around listening, becoming more self-aware, understanding relationships and feelings and the way of operating together and what people need and, you know, people's strengths and just the actual relationships and kind of feelings is the heart of the matter in really ultimately being able to have impact, execute a plan together, work effectively together. And so
you'd say flip it, right? Focus on the people and the relationships, and then the technical or the implementation or the planning will be easier.
It is important.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not the whole.
It's that slowing down to go fast.
I think that's right.
Yeah, because I think if you start with the plan first, you get caught with all the people problems. Whereas if you can deal with the relationships, then the planning and the implementation goes quickly.
Yeah.
Because there's a high level of trust.
Yeah.
I'm reflecting right now. I've learned so much just from you all for so long, but even on this podcast today. But I'm reflecting that we've now been working together for 4 years and 1 month.
Isn't that amazing?
And it feels like such a short period of time and yet so long too, because I actually can't imagine.
Isn't that amazing?
With our entire leadership team, I can't actually remember a time not working with you all, but it's been 4 years and 1 month, which is crazy. And probably 6 or 8 years since we were working together in Iowa, Elizabeth, and I'm feeling very privileged at the moment. For both.
I'm feeling on this morning with the two of you, deeply grateful.
Well, and the fact that we're talking about something that matters, which is why are we doing this? Yeah. You know, why
are we here? Why do we exist? And I actually meant to start out. I meant to start out the podcast with this. The reason why impact is one of our core values at Public Knowledge is because of the two of you. Because for the listeners, we brought in a company as we merged 3 companies together to try to help us define what the future organization would look like. What's our mission? What's our vision? What are our values? And we did that work internally, but that company helped us do it too by doing interviews, by doing focus groups, by talking to people. And the loudest voice that came out of that work was a focus on generating and using evidence to drive impact. And that's how it became one of our core values. And I believe in it wholeheartedly, but it wouldn't be there if it weren't for the both of you. And I should have started there, because I do think I've said this to you a lot, but I think it's how we are successful. It's how we do the work we want to be doing. And without it, we would be completely lost. So thank you for keeping the eye on that and making sure that our future organization was really built around it. So it wouldn't be there if it weren't for you.
Well, we believe in it.
And it was impact, drive, progress, all of that came from the interviews with you both.
Thank you for saying that. I would not have fully realized that, I don't think.
That's exactly why it's there. Okay, well, I cannot thank you both for your time today. I can't thank you enough to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.